ተነስተልን እንኳን ወደ የምዲ ሚዲያ በሰላም መጣችሁ። የምዲ ሚዲያ መረዳት፣ መለካት እንዲሁም መከወን ወይም ማድረግ ላይ የሚሰራ ሚዲያ ነው። ዛሬም እንደተለመደው ኮ ቫዲስ ኢትዮጵያ ወዴት በሚል እንነጋገራለን። በእንግሊዝኛ ነው የምናደርገው። So welcome to UMD Media. UMD Media works on understanding, measuring, and doing. It tries to contribute to evidence-based discourse and decision-making in Ethiopia and in the Horn. Those who are following us live on Facebook and YouTube, please share, like, and subscribe for broader audience. We'll be conversing on Quo Vadis Ethiopia. Today, I have the pleasure of having Fatuma Bedhaso from the US as my guest. And Fatuma, please welcome to UMD Media.
Thank you for having me, Getacho. Thank you for having me on today.
Awesome. So, Quo Vadis Ethiopia. For our audience, I will be introducing you, and you would be able to add on that as well. So, for those who haven't followed Fatuma yet, you can follow her on Twitter. This is her profile on Twitter, Fatuma Bedhaso, F Bedhaso is the handle. And she's also maybe not as equally active, I could be wrong, but on Facebook as well. And you recognize with the name and the profile picture. We'll be talking about the profile picture. I don't normally discuss profile pictures, but in this case, it's relevant. And on LinkedIn, those who are active on LinkedIn, this is her profile on LinkedIn as well, Fatuma Bedhaso. So the way I wanted to frame today, our discussion is on 3 milestones the last 3 years. I think you joined Twitter maybe since 2012, I guess.
Yes.
So we could have discussed all that, but I think for today we will be limiting ourselves into what happened April 2018, and then after that, and so on. So those who are following us on Twitter, I'm on Facebook and YouTube, please share, like, so that we get more audience for this important discussion. So first off, April 2018. Of course, everybody knows that there is a day and the time where Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed assumed office. Maybe before, that day, what was the understanding of the political environment that led into that day, briefly, because we'll be spending more time on the evolution, understanding Fatuma's thought. I'm hoping that it will help us understand where we have been in the other country and where we are heading before the end of the show. Fatuma?
Yes, thank you, Getacho, and hope you're doing well, considering all things considered. And yes, April 2nd, 2018 is quite a day. It was a day that, we were all, most Ethiopians were very hopeful that things are going to change for the better. But what led to that day was a lot of turmoil within the country. There were protests, especially in Oromia, that sustained for about 4 years. asking for, basic human rights, free the political space, application of, the multinational federal arrangement, basically the Constitution to be applied and to be, bettered and actually applied would be a good start. And also for, to free political leaders, journalists, opposing a lot of the repression that was happening under the previous administration or regime. And that culminated with EPRDF undertaking an internal reform within themselves. And Abiy Ahmed was selected to lead this reform and transition the country to democratization, because those protests, for most of us, were going to lead to a better Ethiopia, a better future for Ethiopians overall. And the few months prior to Abiy actually assuming the premiership, he was not a pretty, wasn't that well known in the political space. So a lot of people, especially in the Oromo activist space, were skeptical. Many for their own reasons, others because they had more information than most of us did. Others just because there's a lot of trust issues with the Opidia wing of the EPRDF that he comes from, whether they're going to be able to truly transition the country, and whether this Abiy Ahmed would be capable of actually transitioning the country. Nobody knew anything about him. But for people like me, I can speak for myself. Although I didn't know much about the prime minister, just that hope that we all had, that hunger for a better Ethiopia, for more calm and less death and less upheaval. And also, a lot of us saw the country on the brink at that time. And we thought that that was a chance for Ethiopia to come back to itself, open up the political space, free journalists, freedom of movement for opposition. And we in our mind, or our hope was that opposition would be able to return, a dialogue would take place, and we can truly transition to a better Ethiopia, an Ethiopia that is inclusive, that is, that respects human rights, that we can all see ourselves in, because most of us, especially as an Oromo, we really didn't see ourselves in Ethiopia as a country, or, we've always kind of approached it as an empire that was forced on us very violently at that. So we thought that this was a chance, this was a chance that we can all come together and really interrogate how far we've come, what kind of country this has been for a lot of the repressed and oppressed nations and nationalities in the country. And that there was hope, because in the multinational federalism and that arrangement, there was hope for, bettering that arrangement and, working on what was missing and, applying what worked. And so that's, the jubilation, as you remember, we were all pretty excited. I did have some friends who were skeptical from the beginning till now, and well, they're vindicated now, but I was one of those people who was extremely hopeful that we were entering a better era in Ethiopian politics, but I was wrong.
We'll come to that. So you were clear into what you felt at that time, and you have been clearer on what you are feeling now, and so on. So we'll be talking about that. But that jubilation, that optimism was shared by many, in all directions, I must say, from Mekelle to Bale, anywhere in between, right? So this is the same day. Actually, I mean, the same day, your post the same day was more pragmatic, I would say, than the next, months and so on. You were, in my reading, becoming more and more optimist. So because here you are talking about an advice, an important advice, I would say, walk your talk, Prime Minister Abiy. That was the same day.
Yeah.
And when we move forward, you have written posts like this where you characterize him with all kinds of, very positive superlatives and so on, I would say, right?
Yeah.
And this is June 23rd, where you talk about trust, his judgment, and so on. Again, like I said, this is something that was shared by many, Oromia and elsewhere, and so on. And talking about jubilation, you talk about this picture. I think you were there, right?
I was there, yes.
Yeah. So this is July is 31 and so on. So maybe you can talk about the diaspora versus, what was taking place, on the ground. Somewhere you're talking about Cairo, mentioning. So there was a mix in my reading. There was a mix of you are jubilant, you are happy, you want to trust him and the reform and so on. But at the same time, you just insert some, questionary content. So can you speak to that, Fatima?
Yes. At that time, as you also pointed out, he was saying a lot of the right things, all the things that we wanted to hear, all the things that, hopefuls and, people who are, ideologically, even growing up, we were, I was pessimistic there about Ethiopia, which I do mention in my tweets. His rhetoric was things that would give you hope, that, he's unifying really, fragmented society, fragmented along so many myriads of lines, right? And he was, you see representation of minimally recognized communities, whether it be via dress or via the foods that were represented. So little things like that. So and also telling people, that their aspirations were correct and that, the wrongs have been done, that acknowledgement that the previous regime had done wrongs and apologizing on behalf of that regime because he was part and parcel of that regime. And so, he was saying all the right things, which is why I said, well, talk, walk your talk, is that in the back of my mind, you still, although I'm hopeful, I would like to see him actually doing that in practice, not just talking about it. But I had, at that point, personally, I had no reason to really doubt him. And there were people who were doubting, and I kind of, brushed that off as like it was ideological differences or personal differences, or or it's people losing out on this change, which we all kind of do because when we don't want to actually deal with people who rain on our parades when we're, jubilant. And that's kind of the space that I was in. I think that's the kind of the space that most of the diaspora was in. This picture speaks quite a lot because Minnesota, the Oromo community is quite large. The East African community coming together, when you see all of these different flags in one space celebrating the same thing, it's a surreal feeling, especially being in that space, And so, that's kind of, it just gave us hope that it's possible, that we can overcome a lot of our differences, our political differences, ideological differences, or even our vision of the future can be reconciled, which, could be a naive take, but when you're so hopeful, when you come from a place of so much loss and anguish, and you have generations who have fought this this empire for so long, and for once, I mentioned Arrow because I do believe he ascended to power via the sacrifices of Cairo. These kids went out day after day, months after months, year after year, demanding that the regime recognize their humanity and respect that humanity and treat this, Ethiopians, Oromos included, but Ethiopians generally, like human beings who deserve rights, right? Who deserve dignified existence. And I come from a community who has been hurt so much throughout the years since the inception of modern day Ethiopia. When you see a glimmer of hope, you kind of hang on to it, and you do what you can to further that, and that's where we're at. And most of the diaspora now in Minnesota was hugely supportive of Abiy Ahmed. And I think it transcended, ethnic lines, religious lines, even political, divisions. So that was, that was quite remarkable in and of itself. And, that's something that I always go back to even now, is that this man was afforded one of the most historic opportunities, and he wasted all that, and so much goodwill from people who normally would not, from people who have been hurt over and over again and didn't really have any reason to have the hope that we had. And people who have society that has been so polarized politically, and so that's where we were at. And as you know, that sentiment faded quite fast. It didn't last for a long time because there were things happening on the ground, where his words, he really did not walk his talk, right? He said what we needed to hear until he started to consolidate more power. And you can see the shift in his policies. And I mean, in some of his vision for Ethiopia was kind of clear, I think, especially if you pay attention to some of his speeches. Like, I remember his inaugural speech really threw off a lot of people who are very close to me, and who, it was a red flag for them. And it was a little bit of a red flag for me, because he was talking about the glories of past Ethiopia, which wasn't, for us, is like, what glory of what past Ethiopia, like for who, So, and there were people who were alarmed by that speech, and there are people who continuously were picking up on some of the rhetoric and some of the moves he was making within EPRDF, and some of the changes that were happening, and they were happening very fast. And a lot of people, not a lot of people, but a lot of the people that I knew were very, they were on the fence, because especially about the security concerns, because there were a lot of purges happening within APRDF and the security sector and things like that. But I think overall, for the majority of Ethiopians, whether it be, Oromo, Amara, Tagaru, Sidama, Walaita, everybody was hopeful, until it was too late. So.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, speaking to that notion of being positive and optimist, I think this is one of the last tweets I saw when there was something happening, I think that was related to where he spoke about there were some army elements and so on. So I don't want to, to bother you with the detail behind that, but maybe, fast forward to the same year, maybe, but November, the notion that you are speaking to in terms of Oromia versus Ethiopia, or being Oromo and being an Ethiopian and so on. So this is a long thread where you talk about the sacrifices paid and what was expected in terms of demand and what's made, what's not made, and so on. So this is, again, in less than a year from that, April 2nd day, actually day. So can you speak what was the feeling at that time? I mean, you mentioned already that I think even for Tagaru, that speech was kind of overlooked, so to speak, because of the overwhelming optimism that was reigning. Otherwise, there were elements here and there that there is this aspiration to bring the greater Ethiopia, or making Ethiopia great again, right? So can you speak, Fatuma, to this thread on the feeling of and expectations, interests, being an Oromo and an Ethiopian?
Yes. This was I think this is a less than 6 months from that, optimistic tweet that I posted. And that other tweet that you just posted is about, I think, the incident with Arar Kilo when he was surrounded and he was doing the push-ups. And I remember I was talking to my friends back home, and they said, people in the security sector don't respect him because they know him, and the military doesn't respect him because he talks like a preacher and not like a leader. And so the impression that I got at that time was that he's just very politically naive, and that he is not commanding the kind of respect that he needs to command in order to be the commander-in-chief of the country. And especially in a volatile situation like that, anything could happen. So I think that's kind of my sentiment. But then going forward from that is mostly actually where I started getting alarmed is where, there are these youth, the Oromo youth, the Oromo society in general, but the Oromo youth specifically, like Ero, were consistently and constantly being kind of, scapegoated for a lot of issues that were happening back home. And they're kind of being sidelined throughout the transition. And especially on Ethiopia's state medias, they were vilified. Oromo society was made out to be like this violent, intolerant, and wanted to be balatera, like it's our time now. Tagar was had it, now it's art. And it wasn't the case, because we have been a part of this struggle for so long, and our parents were a part of the struggle. We're a part of the struggle, and we know to a certain extent the psyche of our society and our population, and that just kind of was setting alarm bells in my head. And I started kind of taking just a couple of steps back and trying to see, how did this man come to power, and why him? Why was he selected? And what does his personal beliefs about what Ethiopia should look like, and what Ethiopia is, how is that impacting this transition? And also, if you are already vilifying the movement, leaders of the movement that brought you to this opportune moment, brought all of us to this opportune moment, what does that say? And so I started writing that thread because a lot of people were like, well, we have an Oromo prime minister, and Oromo questions will be answered. Because I think one of the biggest issues in Ethiopian politics is the Oromo question. Most people invest so much time in misunderstanding and misconstruing it. And the Oromo question is just really about human rights, land rights, fundamental rights that are key to democracy. But we were made to seem like we wanted everything. We wanted the empire. We wanted everybody's land. We hated everybody that was not an Oromo. We were, attacking communities, and these youth were, some of the Amara nationalists and mostly Ethiopian media in general was pegging them as these violent, mindless mobs with no purpose, with no understanding of politics, who were just being used by individuals such as Jawar Mohammed and other, Oromo opposition leaders or activists. And so that started setting alarm bells in my head, and started questioning, really, what does the Oromo question, where does it stand in this transition? And I just got a really bad feeling about it based on what was happening on the ground. And it made me uncomfortable that so many Oromos are focusing on, that his supposed Oromo identity, as opposed to concrete solutions for the questions that impact the masses. Because our struggle wasn't really about having an Oromo prime minister or really an Oromo regime. It was more about rights. It was more about respect of human rights, dignified existence for our people. And it was, it's kind of misguided to focus on his ethnic identity, because it really it doesn't mean much, in the larger scheme of things. And it doesn't answer the core of what our struggle is about, because it was not about a few individuals making it to power. It's about fundamental changes in, the makeup of Ethiopia, what Ethiopia is, and people's place in that empire. And our focus wasn't just on Oromia, because we do have this fundamental understanding that in order for us to have peace, in order for us to have, the kind of quality life that we want, everybody around us must have that. So it's about, structural changes, systemic changes. And our struggle has always been against systems. And we understand that systems can be led by Oromos, and Oromos have participated in, repressive regimes throughout Ethiopia's history, individual Oromos, and, that has only harmed Oromos and other groups. And so that our focus shouldn't really be on about, his ethnic identity, but it should be about, what kind of vision does he have for Ethiopia, and what is he willing to do for us to march towards that vision? And the answer wasn't that great. As you can see, it was pretty blatant to what was happening in Arat Kilo and in other places.
Yeah, I mean, this is a segment where we are speaking to very fundamental questions that the unitary camp shies away from, and those who are for real federalism and so on have been urging fundamental issues and questions and so on. So in the case of Tigray, we'll come back to that, but there have been people talking about Ethiopia as an empire. But I think considering or understanding Ethiopia as an empire, I would say the mainstream in the Oromo politics, right?
Yes.
So if you want to speak to audiences who have no idea what Ethiopia as an empire is, what would that be in terms of characterizing Ethiopia as an empire?
Well, Ethiopia is an empire because we see Ethiopia as, this mass that has very violently subjugated nations, sovereign nations, nations who, have languages and systems of governance and, who are nations and forced into this empire. And that is, fundamentally what empires are, in their nation-making effort. They commit genocides, they commit all kinds of horrors to really subjugate and assimilate various groups of people and sometimes exterminate entire groups of people, and for that grand vision. And so we saw Ethiopia as an empire because we knew we were a nation. Oromo is a nation. Oromo is is a country. It's a sovereign nation that was forcibly incorporated into Ethiopia. And Ethiopia did not stop at Oromo or Oromia. It moved on to further south, and it kept eating up different nations and denying people of basic human rights, and consistently until today trying to force people into assimilating into a culture, a language, a way of being in the world that is foreign to them, in order to create this grand vision of their Ethiopia. So for us, fundamentally, that's what it is. We didn't consent to be a part of this empire. We were forcibly and very violently incorporated into this empire that is now seen as a state. And insofar as how it functions to this day, it is an empire. It doesn't recognize the plurality of those who live within its borders. It doesn't respect the rights of these nations and groups of people who who insist on existing as they are, as they were, who want to continue to live. We wanted to continue to live as Oromos, practice our language, develop our art, develop our culture. And we were not allowed to do that because we were constantly being forced to assimilate. And if we weren't assimilating, and we kept resisting, which is why we have been facing so much repression from consecutive Ethiopian governments. And this is not just true for Oromos, it's true for most non-Amaras. And even for the Amara, today's Amara, it's the language is Amara, the religion, we can debate that where Orthodox Christianity started from, but it is in Oromia seen primarily as an Amara religion, right? So there's a class, a higher elite class that's created, but I don't think it fundamentally did anything for the Amara as a people. And that's, the inherently what empires are like. They benefit very few, but they are, they're constantly hungry for, expansion, and usually violent expansion and violent subjugation and violent assimilation projects. And to this day, especially considering what's happening with Tigray, that is exactly how Ethiopia operates, like an empire. So that's basically kind of our outlook on our relationship and many other nations' relationship with Ethiopia.
Yeah, that's interesting perspective. So, like you mentioned, we always underline to your media that when you have all these kind of one against the other, it has always been the elites of one on the other and so on in the name of the people. Always the people are there just as the cannon fodders for all these kind of atrocities and assimilation projects and so on. Maybe I can't cover everything, but let's fast forward to 2020. That's June 22nd. I picked this one because of what we are going to, unfortunate and sad time. So you are talking about you saw something in Hajalu, and even saying, I want Hajalu to be our prime minister. So I don't have the tweet that I can consider as a turning point in terms of giving up on Abiy and so on, but you can also cover that. But let's talk Hajalu because maybe from that day, the unfortunate day, June 29 onward, your profile picture has been Hajalu both on Facebook and Twitter.
Yes.
Can you speak to that, Fatuma?
Yes. Hachalu is a rare breed of humans, and he's one of those people who makes an impact on anyone he comes across. And Hachalu is someone I know who's a close friend of mine. But aside from that, Hachalu just had this. I don't know if you can say inherent. I guess I can say inherent wisdom. And I think this tweet is after an interview that he gave. It's probably his last interview. His insights, his empathy, his understanding of political and social and collective circumstances. Kind of that day was like, maybe this is the kind of prime minister that we deserve. Someone who has insight, someone who has a deep understanding, a respect for people. And Hachalu was one of those people who dedicated his entire life to the Oromo struggle, who went through quite a lot, but who's also very humble, who's also able to empathize literally with anyone, because I think when you've gone through a lot, whether it be personal or politically, you're in a unique position to really understand other people and to empathize, with others as well. And in that interview, Hachalu, just in that interview, if you have interactions with Hachalu, you realize, you see him as an artist, an icon, a once in a generation icon, especially for Oromos. Just because of how he lived his life, he always insisted on living his complete and full truth. But also just his, just deep love for our people, and by extension for every people, for all people. And so I tweeted that, and I truly meant it. I would have worked in an administration run by someone like Hachalu. It's because someone who cares about integrity, whose moral compass is uncompromised always, and who's always willing to tell you the truth, even if it upsets you. And who's also able to see way, way, way far ahead than most of us, and who's willing to do whatever he can for his people and for people in general, who goes out of his way to be a friend, to be a fighter, to put himself in harm's way to speak people's truth. And so Hachalu's death has been incredibly painful. I don't think it's something I can put into words for a lot of us, just because of who he was. And, he is, a man, and many people have died before and since him, but his impact and the meaning of like an Oromo existence without a Hachalu in our struggle is like still.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah,
Yeah.
I know. I mean, the way that week, all your tweets, everything. I mean, that we don't have, unfortunately, the courage and the institutional, independence to investigate and, bring every piece into the same, so that we understand what happened before that day, after that, and so on. But that, I think, is it's not just an ordinary assassination or murder.
Yeah, it's not. A lot of us feared for his life. Many of us feared for his life under the previous administration just because of who he was, and he really didn't shy away from speaking truth and from challenging authority. And so we knew that's the kind of person he is, and that's the kind of person he will always be. And considering how the turn of events, there were quite a few high-profile assassinations that happened before him, and most of them were kind of swept under the rug. Investigations weren't that great. So many of us did fear for his life just because he is very outspoken, and his conviction is rock hard. And so we knew he would rock some boats, and I think most people who pay attention to Ethiopian politics, and particularly especially the Oromo space, the kind of impact and the kind of weight people like Hachalu have. Like, for someone like me, I'm always optimistically cautious and not fully trusting of really anybody. But because I knew Hachalu well enough, I knew he would never compromise on the interest of the Oromo people, and he would never compromise his integrity. So, like, it was always, whatever happens, we have Ero, and we have Hachalu. I definitely put him on a kind of different category of people that I knew, and people that can make a change in that country, and people that can steer politicians, activists, and most stakeholders to the right path, just because he was that committed to integrity. He did have that kind of a moral compass, and he did have that kind of an influence. And so with all of these things combined, we always did know that he was in,
Yeah, I know.
that this might happen, but I just didn't. For me, I just didn't envision a world where he wasn't in it. So.
Yeah, I totally understand, and people are sharing that loss, how it affected their life, and everything that happened after that. Is there any moment that you remember where everything changed for you in terms of that turning point, in terms of the reform, everything? And I know still it's in the courts when it comes to the assassination, but is there anything that you can share, given what you saw in him, from the perspective of the Oromo people and beyond? And this, are you into the category of people who say that that's a setup for something that would happen after that?
Yes. There was I think, whether, I don't know if it was a Facebook post or a Twitter tweet, but someone tweeted there's Ethiopia before Hachalu, and then there's Ethiopia after Hachalu. And I think that's been very prophetic. With his death, that day, I wasn't able to process much of it. I didn't really process his death for a very long time. But, the chain of events that happened, he was killed, the commotion that happened, the just violence that, that enveloped, especially the Oromia region. And, our responses was predictable for anyone who knows the Oromo community. That response was completely expected. And, this is a regime full of cadres who understand the Oromo people, who come from the Oromo society. And, the arrest of Jawar Mohammed and Bakala Garba, and, the violent crack down on, youth, especially, arrows who used to organize in communities. The government went after everybody, people who weren't even politically active, business owners, anybody that had any kind of influence in the community, elderly, no one was spared. And so I think what clicked for me is what happened with his funeral, which is it's like a dagger to the heart. Like we can't conclusively say so-and-so killed this man, but even when you just assess the aftermath of his death, what this man really deserved from us as a society and what was given to him, what was done around his funeral with his family, that I was just done. I remember I was just sitting down. I was like, this was premeditated. This was done to exactly what is happening right now. This was done to crush us, which, if you're going to crush the Oromo society, that's, you got the right person. And after that, we were purged of we weren't, because of our relationship with the Ethiopian Empire, we weren't really able to build institutions. Not that anybody has really been able to build institutions, but there are people who've benefited from the state apparatus institutions, which, as we can see right now, which they're using to really exact horrors on people. But so what served as our institutions were people like Hachalu, people who studied our culture, our folklore, our struggle history, and the heart of their people, and people like Jawar Muhammad, who are able to galvanize an entire generation to fight back, and people like Bakala Garba, who inspire people from across political spectrums, And so what happened is this regime went after everything we have, invested in, and we have been able to build, in the past however many decades, And so we knew that it was deliberate. We knew that things are probably going to get much, much, much worse, especially with everything that was coming out of the Oromia region after, there was an entire media and communication blackout, internet blackout for a month. And within that month, although, the media coverage was lax, even the coverage that it did receive really portrayed Oromos as this violent society and completely ignored the agony and the pain that, that nation was in, because this regime
Unfortunately, I lost Fatuma Bedhaso. I think I hope she will come back. We are discussing Quo Vadis Ethiopia through the lens of Fatuma's tweets from April 2nd, 2018. The time Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed assumed the premiership. And we were just discussing on the June 29th, 2020, on the murder of Hachalu Hundessa. What that meant to her personally, but also to the Oromo people and the entire Ethiopian politics, the before and after the assassination. In the meantime, I'll be speaking to በአማርኛ ላድርገው። ከአንድ ሰዓት ከ45 ደቂቃ በኋላ ከአለማየሁ ወልደ ማርያም ጋር ላይቭ እንገባለን። ኢትዮጵያ ወዴት ትግራይ እንደማሳያ በሚል ፋጡማ ተመልሳ ትመጣለች ብዬ ተስፋ አደርጋለሁ። ነገ ደግሞ ከአሌክስ ዶዋል ጋራ Quo Vadis ትግራይስ ሁማኒታሪያን ክራይሲስ በሚል የትግራይ የሰብአዊ ቀውስ ከየት ወዴት በሚል እናያለን። ወደኋላ ሄደን በ2015 የጻፈው አለ ፖለቲካል ማኒ በተመለከተ፣ ከዛ ማስ ስታርቬሽን አዘ ክራይም በሚመለከት የጻፈው መጽሐፍ ነበረ በፊት የወርልድ ፋሚን ሂስትሪ የከቨር ያደረገበት፣ እሱንም አንስተን ከኖቬምበር 4 በኋላ ደግሞ የጻፋቸው አርቲክሎች ሪፖርቶች አሉ። እሱም የእሱ ድርጅትም ወርልድ ፒስ ፋውንዴሽን፣ እዛ ዙሪያ እናወራለን ከአሌክስ ደዋል ጋራ። ቲዩንን አርጉ ነገ ሰኞ። ከዛ ደግሞ በዚህ ሳምንት ከዚቶ ካብዌ የታንዛኒያ ፖለቲካ መሪ ነው፣ ከሱ ጋራም በአፍሪካን ዩኒየን እና በአፍሪካ ሀገሮች የትግራይ ጦርነት ላይ ያላቸው ሪስፖንስ የነበራቸው እና ያልነበራቸውን እንዳስሳለን። ሰብስክራይብ አድርጉ፣ ላይክ አድርጉ። ፋጡማን እንግዲህ መልሰን ለማግኘት እንሞክራለን። ላፕቶፓ ነው ያጠፋባት። እስቲ እንደገና እየሞከረች ነው። ስትከታተሉት የነበረው ከፋጡማ በዳሶ ጋራ ዲስከስ እያደረግን ያለ ነው፣ ኮንቨርስ እያደረግን ነው። ኢትዮጵያ ወዴት በሚል ከአብይ አህመድ ወደ ስልጣን መምጣት ጀምሮ እስካሁን ያለውን እሷ እስካሁን ዲስከስ ያደረግነው እንደ ብዙ ኢትዮጵያውያን በደስታ በተስፋ ተቀብለው እንደነበረ በዛ ወቅት በዕለቱ ዕለትም ከዛ በኋላ በነበሩት ሳምንታት ወራትም ስጽፋቸው የነበሩ ነገሮች አንስተን እና ምክንያቷን አንስተን እያወራን ነበር። ከዛ በኋላ ያው ታላቋን ኢትዮጵያ መልሶ ማምጣት፣ ታላቋ ኢትዮጵያ ለማ እንዴት የሚለው ጥያቄ ውስጥ ይከታት እንደነበረ እያየን ነበር። በኋላ ደግሞ ጁን 29 2020 የሀጫሉ ሁንዴሳ መገደል ምን ማለት እንደነበረ ለሷ ማለት ከጻፈቻቸው ፕሮፋይል ፒክቸሯም እስካሁን ከዛን ጊዜ ጀምሮ እንግዲህ 1 ዓመት ሊሆነው 2 ሳምንታት አካባቢ ነው የሚቀረው። 23 ቀን ይቀረዋል፣ 3 ሳምንት ይቀረዋል። እና ያ ምን ማለት እንደነበረ እንደ ግል እንዲሁም እንደ ማህበረሰብ እንደ ኦሮሞም እንደ አጠቃላይ ለኢትዮጵያ ፖለቲካም እያየን ነበረ። እንዲህ እያነሳን እያለን ነበር የተቋረጠው። እስቲም ከቻለች መልሳ ሪስታርት እያደረገች ነው፣ ካልሆነ እዚህ ላይ ለማቆም እንገደዳለን ማለት ነው። ግን ከ30 ደቂቃ 40 ደቂቃ በኋላ ከአለማየሁ ወልደ ማርያም ጋር ጥሩ ዝግጅት ላይቭ እንደገና ይኖረናል። እንድትሳተፉ እንድትከታተሉ፣ ሌሎች እንዲደርሳቸው ደግሞ በፌስቡክ እና በዩቲዩብ ነው እየተላለፍን ያለ ነው። ዩኤምዲ ሚዲያን ሰብስክራይብ አድርጉ፣ የዩቲዩብ ቻናሉን ብዙዎች እንዲደርስ አድርጉ። በተቻለ መጠን ለማስረጃ መር እና ለመረጃ ጠገብ ተዋጽኦ እና ውሳኔ የራሱን አስተዋጽኦ ለማድረግ የሚታትር ሚዲያ ነው። የምትደግፉት ብዙዎች እንዲያዩት እንዲደርሳቸው በማድረግ ነው። ሌላም ጨከን ያለ ድጋፍ ማድረግ ከፈለጋችሁ ደግሞ ሱፐር ቻት እና ሱፐር ስቲከር በመግዛትም መርዳት ትችላላችሁ። ቻት የምታደርጉበት ዩቲዩብ ላይ አይ ቲንክ የሚያሳያችሁ ይመስለኛል ያው ኦፕሽን። ግን ብዙዎች እንዲዳረስ ያው ይዘቱ ከወደዳችሁት፣ አሰራሩን ፎርማቱን ከወደዳችሁት ብዙዎች ደግሞ እንዲያገኙት ማድረግ ትልቅ እገዛ ነው። ያንን እንድታደርጉ ጠይቃለሁ። የተወሰነ 1-2 ደቂቃ እንጠብቃትና ካልሆነ በሌላ ቀን በተስተካከለ ሁኔታ እንደገና ትመጣለች ፋጡማ በዳሶ። ጥሩ ውይይት እያደረግን ነበር። እስቲ ቼክ ላርጋት። Okay, መጣሽ? Great.
Yeah, I'm so sorry. My laptop just completely shut off, so that's...
No worries, understandable. I hope it will cooperate in terms of finishing this interesting conversation.
Yeah, my apologies. There's been a lot of hiccups today. I know you've been so accommodating. I appreciate it. Thank you.
No worries. So I think I should also run into another show by the hour, so we'll try to wrap it up. Yeah. I think the Hachalu topic by itself can take us in our long time in terms of discussing, and it's worth discussing. And my hope is this is only the beginning. This is the first conversation we'll have and we'll continue to have, hopefully. So let me jump into the eve of November 4th. So this is the closest to it I could get. And you are critiquing the report from the crisis group, not maybe the entire report, but you are mentioning about the demand from the TPLF side or Tigray in terms of there has been, I mean, for our audience, there has been a number of calls, public calls by the TPLF or by the Tigray government for an all-inclusive dialogue, national dialogue, including, those jail leaders like Jawar and so on. But crisis group was saying, just take it easy, your demand should not be that high and so on. So you are critiquing that. So can you speak to that briefly, and we'll jump into the other topics.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, I remember that report, and I was actually very taken aback by it because, our personal sentiments about TPLF and its past practices aside, there was a standoff between TPLF, or the Tigray regional government, and the federal government, and for people who are analyzing the Horn of Africa, my position was that this is an opportunity in how federalism can actually work, and so that's the crisis group saying maybe the TPLF should really water down its demands, which wasn't really that egregious of a demand to say we would like a national dialogue to take place before we go further, because for anyone watching what was happening and what the standoff is really about, it's really about the vision for the vision for the future of Ethiopia. And for that to actually mean anything, all stakeholders should be a part of a national dialogue that can bring all kinds of stakeholders together, so we can map out a better future. And Tigray's position is that we will not compromise on multinational federalism. And most Oromo opposition parties were also that. Most southern nations and nationalities, and such as the Sidama, who were asking their constitutionally mandated rights to be recognized as regions. And so this was really an exercise in constitutionalism, right? This is what is supposed to take place, and this is what should be encouraged. But what crisis group actually said is that this particular demand shouldn't really be a demand, which I can't think of a more existential demand to really ask in the crux of that moment, to be quite honest. And I have my personal opinions on the authors of that statement or that report, and I don't know what their understanding, the level of understanding they have of Ethiopian politics, but I it's kind of taken aback for someone who's been observing Ethiopian politics, especially in the last few years, and what actually culminated in Abiy coming to power is this ask of nations and nationalities to be recognized, to have, the right to self-administration. And what Tigray was doing, what TPLF in this particular instance was doing, was exercising its right to self-administer the region of, that it represents, which, it was a legal question. As far as the political and the larger context, because the country is facing crisis on multiple fronts, you would, I think, encourage, national dialogue for people to be, for opposition party that are, incarcerated based on, political, moves. Really, this is about consolidating power for the current regime. I wouldn't, I don't know if I was a part of TPLF to say I'm going to sit down and, and what am I going to sit down with you about if I don't see any, if what I'm seeing from this current administration and its allies, which is the unity camp, right, is really this single-minded focus on dismantling federalism. And that is an existential threat to people and to nations who want to continue to exist as nations, right? Who were able to get at least some of their questions answered via, this existing constitution. That would be one of the first demands I would make. So that, that kind of threw me off, and so I critiqued it, which I didn't say much about it. I just kind of posted it.
Yeah.
Insane to suggest that this shouldn't be a demand that particular time.
Yeah, I think that also is part of the equation when you look at now what happened on November 4th, and after that, for me, it's incredible that the notion and the narrative on the national media, the unitary camp, everyone surrounding the prime minister, they want to portray a picture where TPLF said, I don't want to discuss anything, as if they were resisting any discussion. Actually, what we saw from that report and everything we know from the public statements TPLF or Tigray government was making is they were asking for more discussion, inclusive discussion, dialogue, and so on. That aside, 4 days after your tweet, November 4 came, and we know what happened after that. So this is a 215th day today as we are live here with all kind of, unspeakable sufferings, death, refugees, emergency food assistance need, and so on. On that, what I saw in your kind of golden thread of your tweets and your thoughts is that what happened in Tigray is an extension of what was happening in Oromia, the 2.5 years prior to November 4. Among other tweets, this is, a tweet that you made the week of November 16th and so on. So can you generally speak, to that extension? You are characterizing that there has been something going on in Oromia and went to Tigray. Actually, later on, you also talk about it will not stop in Tigray. It will come back to Oromia with the same scale, with the same, type of atrocities and genocidal killings and so on. Can you speak to that?
Yes, I think a lot of the premise where especially foreign media or analysts, except for those who are who have integrity and actually have been paying attention and speak to that, the premise is from the government side, TPLF attacked the Northern Command Post, so therefore they triggered this war. But what has been happening in Oromia for the past 2+ years is violent repression of what they call oil lift shani, which is just a label that they put on anybody that they would like to get rid of, right? And Oromia is the center of Ethiopia. It's a political and economic hub of the country, and I feel like this regime really needed to get a handle on Oromia. And so they went after certain regions to an extent where, like Walaga, most of Walaga was under a command post. Guji was under a command post. Most, those affiliated with the OLF and other opposition medias were being, they were being targeted. There were, extrajudicial killings. Denial of, participation in politics, ransacking political offices, deterring opposition from, speaking to, the public, including Jawar. And, you can see all this escalation, but in certain parts of Oromia, particularly Walaga, Western Walaga, the government was undertaking a literal soft war, and which was ignored for the most part, unfortunately, to the detriment of the whole country. Now that we see where we are at, and that was also an ideological war, because the proponents of multinational federalism and people who are adamant about the continuation of multinational federalism are within southern part of Ethiopia mostly, and then Tigray, but Oromia was a hub of that. Especially OLF as a political party has always been a proponent of that, and they pegged it as a secessionist, violent movement and political party that has this violent armed wing, but they were able to label anybody, forget the ones who are actually armed, and and who are the rebels who are actually armed. They were labeling anybody that they would like to get rid of as Oel, and killing with impunity, arresting with impunity, disappearing with impunity, raping with impunity. There were stories coming out of Western Walaga where women were coming on the few medias that exist, which is OMN at that time, and ONN, which is now both shut down. Coming and saying, the rampant rapes that were happening to young girls, and those who had something were able to flee to Finfinne and other parts of the country, but those who couldn't are really facing daily traumas. And all of this wasn't really covered. Western media didn't cover, international media didn't cover it. We don't have a lot of media or journalists were willing to go to a literal war zone to report on these things. So most of that went unreported. So I think the premise now, when people analyze the war on Tigray, is that, is TPLF attacked ENDF, which I am not sure. I don't know. I wasn't there. But you could see the trajectory of, the moves that this regime was making, this regime and its allies were making. It really did start in Oromia. And it was pretty sure it was going to culminate, well, not to this extent, because I couldn't imagine the kind of horror that we've been witnessing, but that there will be a showdown with TPLF, because it is the strongest opposition that they had, especially after going after the Oromo opposition, OFC and OLF, and kind of purging them. That was what was left, and so that would be the final showdown. And I did say it will come down to Oromia, because Oromos will continue to resist. We've been resisting for over 100 years. We're not going to stop now. And they need to control Oromia to really run that country. And so, after they get their win in Tigray, which doesn't look like it's going to be a win, even after all the devastation, is that it was going to come back down with the same level of violence, with the same level of genocidal intentions, and that we really need to recognize the trajectory of the choices that they're making, the moves that they're making, and that I really do wish more people really analyzed the war on Tigray with that premise. This war didn't just start on November 4th. It has been ongoing. It was ignored for the majority of it, because he was dubbed as this Oromo prime minister. Why would he go to war with Oromos, which wasn't the case? His primary target were Oromo opposition parties, were Oromos who he felt threatened his power. And then Tigray was almost like a natural extension of that. It was a culmination of that war. And the war will, I think, with my assessment, will culminate in Oromia, but I think will continue in Tigray. I think people will continue to resist. This is, people who, who've been fighting for generations, and I don't think people who will give up. Oromos will not give up either. But, this is easy to see if you really followed what was taking place in Oromia and these parts, especially that were under command post. Because we weren't able to get a lot of the information, I am 100% sure that a lot of, the crimes that happen in Wallaga are still underreported. We don't know. And thankfully, what are the horrors that are being exacted on Tagaru and Tigrans is seeing the light of day. It is being reported, and, reporters and journalists are able to go and report on, as much as possible. But, in Oromia, bad part is that hasn't been the case. And so most people they don't see that connection. But I think for a lot of us, the reason why we were opposing this war is that we knew, the kind of horrors it was exact. We knew that there wouldn't be an end to it, right? Like, we knew it would continue, and it would continue to devastate, in a sense, civilians who had no say in any of this. So yeah, that's kind of my premise, why I'd like to bring that up often, because I hope that more people start to realize that they're all of these crimes, the so-called communal violence, which I'm pretty confident are orchestrated. They're all connected, and they're all connected towards a specific end that this regime and its allies would like, and that end is really culminating in dismantling multinational federalism and having the unitary state, and centralizing power. And I think that's what it is about. It's a power grab, and it's a power grab that is costing us lives. And I think our lack of analyzing it with the bigger picture and, is going to keep costing us more, because we need to realize that all of these violent bouts, all of these wars, all of these egregious human rights violations, all of these genocidal intentions are very much connected.
Yeah, I mean, this is an interesting perspective where it's not coming out of the blue, but of course the scale, the characters, who is involved with the forces, to what aim, and so on is over the roof. So this is my tweet from this morning, where I tried to say, Abiy Ahmed's Ethiopia as a story. So study the main characters and the plot, you will understand a whole lot. So talking about these characters, you say this on November 22nd. The main character, of course, Abiy Ahmed, but you are characterizing him as the shameless tyrant here. And it was related to release he made on the 21st, talking about how he cares for the well-being of Tigray, safety of people of Tigray, and so on. For me, Fatuma, if I have to characterize what's happening in Tigray and the kind of people who are involved, those who normally claim to be human rights activists, opposition groups, for 3 decades or more, they are part of the plot. They are part of, this force at Arakilo.
Yep.
And you actually, in your description on Twitter, you describe yourself. You say that the best you can be is being yourself. So I see being yourself everywhere in your posts. So one of them is where you talk about Birhanu Nagga. So the reason I posted my Twitter this morning is also related to, these characters in this Ethiopian, or making Ethiopia great again. So you also talk about, those who are supporting him, and we'll talk about that. Even those who claim to be, leading the independent Human Rights Commission and so on. So can you speak to the characters that are surrounding Abiy Ahmed, either in the form of opposition parties, waiting for the election to happen, or either in the form of Daniel Bakala, leading independent institutions, quote unquote, and so on. So what is your reading of where Ethiopia is when we talk about Quo Vadis Ethiopia?
Yeah, thank you. I think these are important questions to ask, especially the Tigray war. Um, as we saw,
Can I watch TV,
and
Dad?
we, realize, those we've been hearing, that the EZMON leaders had a roadmap that they provided to Abiy Ahmed, and those roadmap. That's the roadmap he's been following for the past couple of years, and most people are like, "Well, it's conspiracy theory. That's just hearsay." We're not quite sure, but you can see based on some of the public comments that they make or lack of comments that they make. Concerning where the country's going, even in the face of violent displacements of different communities, and with Tigray, where a foreign country is invited into a regional state of a country and is willing to pillage, rape, kill, destroy infrastructure with impunity, which is complete insanity. But when you go back in hindsight, look at Abiy Ahmed's rise to power and who he aligns himself with, and some of the meetings that have taken place. We can go back to the rapprochement with Eritrea, and that nobody but Isaias and Abiy Ahmed knew about. Nobody knew the terms of the agreements. What were the agreements about? And it didn't involve a really key regional state that borders Eritrea, right? Like, because the conflict was about area that borders these two states, and if it wasn't goodwill, you'd see the involvement of Tigray regional government in that rapprochement deal, and nobody knew the details of that rapprochement. And to their credit, Eritrean activists were really raising the alarm when we were all celebrating that rapprochement, and what it can mean for the future of Eritreans. There's Eritrean refugees in Ethiopia, and Eritreans in Eritrea, right? Um, so when you go back and start to add things up and start to see who's who and what's what, you realize that really the war on Tigray is a war of vengeance. It was not was a law enforcement operation, but really it's about people who have been plotting for decades on how to settle a score, right? And you see it in the kind of crimes that are being committed, especially with the sexual violence and literally the war being taken out on women's bodies, and just the details of these crimes. You just see that it is really a war of vengeance, and you see who is an apologist for it, right? Like, you brought up the fact that former human rights activists, people who have built a reputation for themselves in the human rights communities, and who have these stellar reputations as an upstanding human rights advocate, and Abiy was able to employ these people, and making himself palatable and making his crimes palatable to the world, as you see, especially with Daniel and EthioHRC, which I always make it a point to say that is probably the most important role that that appointment that Abiy has made to date, because Daniel does have a reputation in the human rights community. He does have relationships with foreigners and foreign NGOs, and people who are influential in these spaces, right? You could see, how that influence played out in that Mike Hadra report, which was, which took place, which didn't, it kind of shocked all of us, right? And you can see how he has been able to downplay some of the egregious crimes in Oromia and Tigray, blatantly denying the refugees that are fleeing, and blaming refugees for kind of accusing them, actually not just blaming, accusing them of being TPLF spies and TPLF agents. and downplaying the crimes that took place, downplaying sexual violence crimes, allegations of rape, almost dismissing these just an appalling level of dismissal, right? And with with people like Branu Nagga, I don't know how else he can endorse this war more. I think they've done their utmost to really rally the unitary camp diaspora to come out and protest in support of a genocidal war, this is a genocidal war, and we don't say that lightly. It even took me a while to really call it what it is. And it is a genocidal war, right? It is going after the existence of an entire group of people, and it's being said to women as they are being raped. It is being said to young men as they are being rounded up and massacred. It is, you can see it in the devastation of cultural sites, right? That that really are at the core of who people are as a people. So you have people out here, we fight with them on social media and they call us TPLF agents, which is laughable for someone like me to be called a TPLF agent, right? They do anything and everything and invest so much time in and just misrepresenting and misconstruing what is actually happening, and denying genocide, denying stories of people who have put themselves in vulnerable situations to really shed a light on what is happening, right? And attacking foreign institutions, accusing every single institution all over the planet as being, paid by TPLF. The insanity of it all is actually mind-boggling. I haven't been able to wrap my head around it, but you can see, who the actors are, who the architects are, and what's taking place and how it's being taking place, and who is the proponents of it, who is publicly defending it, right? Who is rallying support for this regime as they see the carnage that is taking place in these communities, and who are telling people to go out and burn flags of countries who are telling people to stop killing your own citizens, right? Allow humanitarian aid, right? Like, there's a looming famine that could kill millions of people. You think, I just never imagined that we would be in a situation where there would be a man-made looming famine at that, and where actual Ethiopians, no matter the political differences, right? No matter our grievances, I personally have grievances against the TPLF, right? But what do you get out of starving an entire group of people? You know what I mean? You have wasted an opportunity to hold those who did commit those crimes accountable, right? Those crimes are done in the past. Most of the people who were committing these crimes are still in power. They're architects of this war themselves. And, and if you wanted to hold TPLF accountable, that opportunity has passed, right? Right now, what you're doing is you're trying to exterminate an entire group of people, or at least at the bare minimum, completely desecrate their existence, and deny them of a dignified life. So, I mean, at this point, it's hard to wrap my mind around it. I'm sure.
I know. I mean, this is, if we were to understand this, I think it would have been a bit of a, move in the right direction in terms of solving it, right? That's it's very hard to understand, specifically the elite, without any shame. And in this age and day, to come out, repeatedly to support this, to justify it, to deny it, to cover it up, it's beyond my understanding. For many of us, these were friends of us in one way or another, either through churches, through academic institutions, and so on. So after even 200 days or more, I'm still at loss in terms of understanding what is the motive, how do they sleep, all that, and so on. So I can understand if you can't, wrap your head around this. One thing that was not noticed, maybe because of language barrier as well, is after the war, I think some month into the war, we saw this shared on social media. So it's in Afan Oromo, and you, I think you tweeted on that. I will play it. You can, speak to that, because it's important how those who think that this genocidal, clearly genocidal war on Tigray will not stop there. I mean, people are open about it, right? So let me play it, and Fatuma, you will help us understand what is happening here in February.
Hojiiwwan kun yoo hojjetaman illee ammas dhimmoonni xiyyeeffannaa barbaadan jiru. Gaaffii keessan irratti tokko tokko akkan argetti juuntaa guyyaa 15 keessatti mo'attanii dhuguma baa'oo shanii maaliif dadhabdanii humna dadhabdaniiti moo humna waan hin qabaanneef moo maal inni kan jedhus ka'ee jiraachaa. Konvenshinal waar kan ta'ee fi riphee lolaa kan jedhamu kun garaagarummaa mataa isaa hin qaba. Konvenshinal waar kan ta'e meeshaa gurguddaa qabatee birgeediidhaan maal ijaaramee fuula duratti kan waraanu jechuudha. Amalli kaabarratti ture kana ture. Saraawitiin jechaadha raayyaa.
So
lola akkasii miti amalli isaa.
What is happening? What is happening, and when? Give us the context, and I will show your tweet on that.
Yeah, that's Fikadu Tasamba. He's saying a lot of you are asking us questions. You defeated the junta in 15 days, and they're supposedly more powerful. Why can't you guys contain or defeat Oelif Shani? Is it about power? Is it about is it about ability? What is it? And he says, well, the thing is, in Tigray, it's conventional war. You have big weapons. Whoever has the most better weapon defeats them. He said, as far as Oelif Shani is concerned, it's Ribelola is like it's a guerrilla warfare, and guerrilla warfare is a completely different beast, and so it's harder. And he actually goes on to say, in order to kill the fish, you have to drain the sea. So what we're going to do is drain the sea, because this guerrilla warfare, obviously you hide, within civilians, right? Like you live within that society. So therefore it's hard to decipher who's a fighter and who isn't. So what he's suggesting is actually pretty blatantly genocidal, saying, oh, we're going to drain the sea to catch the fish. So we're going to go after the communities that they're hiding in to get to Oelif Shani. And so it's a pretty blatant admission of a genocidal intent.
Yeah, it's scary, isn't it? I mean, back in the 1980s, the Derg official, very senior official of the Derg, clearly used that, war phrase on the people of Tigray, when they were fighting TPLF at that time. So the Howden massacre, everything was related to that killing. I mean, to kill the fish, you dry the sea, the ocean, the lake, and so on. So, I mean, at this day and age, on regional state television, I assume, saying that in regional parliament is indeed a very good indicator of where we are in terms of the political elite and so on. And these people were part of the so-called TPLF regime during that time, so they just changed, their side, or cross the aisle, so to speak. With that, I mean, in terms of understanding the characters and your evolution, Twitter sphere evolution, I would say, over the last 2.5 years, gives us an idea of the same thing what happened in Tigray. When I talked to my mom in September about electing or voting for which party and so on, and the feeling of being an Ethiopian, I mean, I'm sure many, I can argue that with confidence that overwhelmingly many Tagaru don't see themselves in Ethiopia tomorrow. And so on. So, but I see also a tweet that's coming from you from April 4th, kind of maybe not with the same level of, clarity, but you're talking about referendum and positions and independence and so on. Can you speak to this tweet and maybe a tweet that was also in the same month but on the same topic.
Yeah.
Where is Ethiopia heading? Or we can ask the question, where is Oromia heading?
Right. Yeah, I think, I can see that, drastic change within, even, Tagar friends that I've had who were, huge proponents of Ethiopia, identified as Ethiopians, who I used to debate about my view and my place, and my perspective about Ethiopia and why I don't identify as an Ethiopian, have changed. And I mean, when you are, on the receiving end of the brutality of the Ethiopian empire, it drastically shifts, your view of it and, and your place in it, right? Tegar no longer feel like they're a part of a country because that country has waged a war on their families, on their very identity, right? Because they're not safe anywhere in the country. So that has been the story of Oromos for generations, which is why we grew up raised as saying we're from Oromia. I'm an Oromo. That's how I identify. I don't see myself within Ethiopia. I don't see myself as an Ethiopian because Ethiopia has never embraced me. Ethiopia has never reflected me. Ethiopia has simply been imposed on me, right? And to the detriment of my people, my language, my way of being, my way of existing in the world. And so, a lot of people, they like to point fingers. I'm from Minnesota, so they think, these Oromo, extremist Oromos from Minnesota, extremist Oromos from Minnesota come from Oromia, right? We come from Ethiopia, and we are, products of that society. And there's a reason why when we come here, we say we are from Oromia, and we are, and it's a political statement, it's a political stance to take because we have the space to do it, right? So say that space was given to Oromos, by way of a referendum, based on my interactions with people, based on sentiments within my family, sentiments within the people that I know, and generally the Oromo society. I think if a referendum was to be given, or most Oromos would opt for an independent Oromia because that is how we see ourselves, right? Especially given the fact that Ethiopia continuously represses us and attacks us and violently subjugates us, right? So in the future, I can't say I'm not a psychic, but based on what is happening, unless something, the global community, or I don't even like to say that, but the international community, who has many vested interests within this, in the survival of the Ethiopian empire, once again intervene and something drastic happens, I think Ethiopia is heading towards disintegration, and a really violent one at that. And I could say Oromia will be free. We'll gain our independence. Tigray can be free, and Tigray can have its independence. Sidama's the same. But I don't, based on what we understand of these violent disintegrations, that's usually not the case. And I think the humanitarian crisis would be huge. And I don't know that we are, even given the fact that we are witnessing horrors on a daily basis, waking up to horrors after horrors. I don't know that we are ready for an Ethiopia that has violently disintegrated. But the trajectory of what's happening right now with the people in power and their allies, that's where it's heading. And I think some of these so-called allies, that was their intention from the get-go. So I don't know. It's going to take a miracle to save Ethiopia. I don't personally believe that it is even worth saving. But if there was, an ideal situation in which most of these nations can gain their independence, and or something along the lines of like like a hard not really federalism. I don't know right now, right? With emotions running high, I don't know how that would work. That would also really depend on a lot of different things and a lot of different actors. And politics is really the game of the elites, right? And I don't have much faith in any of the elites at this point. So a confederacy maybe is thing I would opt for, given the fact that this violent disintegration after we've lost so much infrastructure has been destroyed. And, in Tigray, I mean, the scale is, it's scary, but, all over the country, right? Like the country is completely depleting its resources. I just, it's hard for me to envision what that would look like, but it's a complete possibility that Ethiopia could violently disintegrate, and the world would be facing a gigantic humanitarian crisis. And, impact for all of us is really disastrous in that case. But considering, like a lot of people say, Tigray got a lot of attention, and I don't, attention is one thing, but intervention is key. And I don't think the international community is intervening on time to really avert this looming crisis. And that looming crisis will, without a question, bleed into other parts of, let alone the country, but the entire Horn region. So, as I said, if a miracle happens, a miracle happens. If not, I guess we'll weather the storm together. But either kind of where I'm at.
Yeah, it's unfortunately the gruesome reality that we are ending with this show. But I just want to point out to this unfortunate reality is shared by the power corridors in the US as well. That I saw the letter to Biden written by the Foreign Affairs, I think, committee from the Senate, where they were clearly saying that we are not at the point we care anymore about US-Ethiopia relationship. That is a lower cost to pay compared to the collapse of Ethiopia and so on. So they are seeing it as well the way you are seeing. But one tweet that you were responding to, actually, he was my guest, I think 2 weeks ago, Bahar Omer.
Yes.
He was quoting Chris Kuhn on how you are saying to that, like how Cairo helped this prime minister to power, and most of these leaders are in jail. Chris Kuhn was saying that, and you're saying the one that will remove him will also be from Oromia. So my point here is there was an audience also asking that question, the Oro Mara, I don't know what we call it, coalition, or I don't know how to characterize it, but that was, I think, meant to be his power base. At least it was portrayed that way. So considering that, you can speak to that, Oromara aspect as well. But I want to end with what's your perspective of where the Oromia versus, we didn't see Jawar jailed coming, and then it will be a normal. Now it's, a normal in that politics, in the political landscape of Ethiopia. So can you speak to that? And we end our show for today, and hopefully we will get, without any technical issues, another opportunity.
Yes. Yes. Thank you. I think, I think it's a point that I like to make continuously, is that ultimately, just because of its, its geographical location, our numbers, and also, the history of Oromia within Ethiopia, I think Oromia and, resistance movements in Oromia will be the catalyst again to remove him. And if nothing happens in Oromia, he will 100% remain in power. And, I don't know. I can't say conclusively 100%, but he's more likely, to succeed. But to your point with, things that have happened in Oromia that have shocked most people, is that, the Oromo movement was very strong. No one could have imagined Jawar being arrested and that being a normal state of existence, right? But in the aftermath of Hachalu, that's why Hachalu's assassination has been, such a, a game changer, right? In his Abiy Ahmed's power consolidation moves. is that he was able to completely purge the Oromo resistance movement, starting from its, its biggest proponents, its leaders, to, the young kids who usually organize themselves, to, artists, to, there isn't a segment of Oromo society that, that was safe, that has been safe. So, the Oromia currently is, we're resisting, we're fighting, but we're also, have been depleted of a lot of power. In the aftermath of Hachalu, and it's not as easy as get up and overthrow this regime. But I think once again, as it happened with the previous regime, that there needs to be a strong movement from Oromia to be able to remove Abiy Ahmed from power. Not just Abiy Ahmed, but this regime. In order for that to happen, a lot of things must happen at the same time, which I can't say this or that, but the likelihood of that happening, I think, is pretty high. A lot of youth who have been completely, discouraged, are leaving their jobs and joining OLA. There's a huge OLA movement across Oromia, in parts of Oromia that have never really seen rebel movements. So, the resistance, I think, is building up, and the sentiment within, it doesn't seem like it, but the sentiment within the society is very bitter. So, anything could happen, as with Ethiopia, as we've seen the past few years, that, a lot of things are, unpredictable. It's a volatile political and in social environment right now, and so anything could trigger anything at this point. But I am pretty confident that if a strong movement starts within Oromia, that Abiy Ahmed could be removed from power. But as to how that happens is, I'm not very clear. But Jawar and the other movement leaders who are incarcerated, I think their actions mean a lot. They're still incredibly very influential, and they're doing a lot more from prison than these regime cadres and PP cadres are doing. So I think we just kind of have to observe that space. But I think Oromia could once again become a catalyst. But as far as Oromhara, most of us were never like big fans of it. I think that was a strategy Opidio ANDM had to, I guess, outplay TPLF, right, and the APRDF. But as far as the people-to-people relations, I think it was kind of a ridiculous thing to do, because Ethiopia is an empire of many nations, and most of these in Oromia is like a hub. Everybody lives in Oromia. When I lived back home, I had neighbors from almost all over Ethiopia, right? And so this special relationship with the Amaras and Oromos is kind of I don't know, doesn't even deserve comment. But if we're going to live together, we're all going to live together, every single one of us, with respect for one another. And this idea of, even Oro, Bara, Oro, Tigray, Oro, anything is kind of, I think it's, if we fight for human rights, we fight for everybody's human rights, right? Like even those that we disagree with fundamentally deserve human rights, because my rights are, inextricably linked to your rights. And so I think our future, we maybe need to interrogate ourselves, and people who inhabit these spaces also need to interrogate themselves. Position leaders need to interrogate themselves and about the implications of these agendas that they push. But in general, I think if we're going to fight for human rights, we need to fight for everybody's human rights. We need to be invested in people's lives as people, not just because they come from my ethnic group or this other ethnic group, because it's strategically feasible to fight. It shouldn't be like that. And I think we need to be able to pass that point, because we've seen what that does, right? Like it's this zero-sum political game that Ethiopian political elites play is disastrous for the common Ethiopian, no matter which ethnic group you come from. And so I think, which is why I really respect your platform. I think it's important for people to interrogate themselves and, you know, their place in these spaces, and, you know, the kind of agendas and the kind of, you know, narratives and framing that we push. So, you know, as for me, like I said, as you said in my bio, it's that I'm going to be me, and I'm just fundamentally invested in people living a dignified life, right? You can be Oromo. Well, you know, I advocate for Oromos. I'm an Oromo, and Oromos don't have many advocates or allies, right? But I advocate for every human being to live a dignified life, you know, and I think you know, I can get it wrong quite a few times myself. And so we need to consistently grow and challenge ourselves and each other, and hopefully grow past things like Oromara and things, you know, these petty games that are played at our expense. And so that's all I'll say on that. But I think I hopefully, you know, I'm still hopeful.
Yeah, that's a very powerful and important, I think, remark to end our show with today. It has been a pleasure to speak to you, Fatuma, today. And like I said a couple of times, I really look forward to getting another opportunity to speak to you on UMD Media.
Of course. Thank you so much for me. And, you know, my thoughts and prayers are with you and your family and your people. And, you know, we, as I said, our fate are inextricably linked, and, you know, still hopeful that we'll see a better day from this. So thank you so much. I will definitely come back, and thank you for having me.
Great. Thank you, and have a good evening.
You as well. Bye-bye.
Viewers, this was UMD Media show on Quo Vadis Ethiopia with my guest Fatuma Bedhaso. ስትከታተሉት የነበረው ከፋጡማ በዳሶ ጋር ያደረግነው ኢትዮጵያ ወዴት የሚል ዝግጅት ነበረ። ካጋጠመን የቴክኒካል ጉዳዮች ውጪ እኔ እንደወደድኩት እርግጠኛ ነኝ እንደምትወዱት ያደረግነው ውይይት ብዙ ነገሮች ነው የሸፈነው። ዘግይተናል፣ ግን አሁንም ከ10 ደቂቃ በኋላ ከአለማየሁ ወልደ ማርያም ጋር እመጣለሁ በአማርኛ። አለማየሁ ጋር የምናወራው Quo Vadis ኢትዮጵያ ትግራይ አዝ ኤ ሌንስ፣ ኢትዮጵያ ወዴት ትግራይ እንደማሳያ ነው። በሌላ ሊንክ ነው የምትመጡት፣ ከታች አድርጌዋለሁ። ሌላ ስቱዲዮ ነው የምንገባው ማለት ነው። ለተከታተላችሁን አመሰግናለሁ። ያስተናገድኳችሁ ጌታቸው አሰፋ ነበርኩ። ሰላም።